an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Travelers, Season 2, Episode 5, Jenny. In this episode, I'm going to try to avoid being too smug about the fact that I was right and that Jenny ain't shit and that Philip should have known that and maybe not listen to her. I'm going to try my best. However, this was also, in many other ways, just a difficult episode to watch for obvious reasons. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Stacie for commissioning this episode. Hi, Stacie, if you're out there. I really appreciate you. This episode is probably one that y'all have been low-key waiting for me to get to. And I wonder exactly how... I want to know where this is going specifically, because I ended the episode before this with the whole situation with the seeds and the conglomerate that was, maintaining their hold on the patent for something that was going to wind up being, it was this whole thing that honestly fascinated me. And I was hoping that was going to come back around again. I wanted there to be more information about who did that, why, and our team figuring out why. Now, the way that this reveal happens this episode, it seems pretty clear to me that it's likely it was the faction that did it. And the faction is apparently taking some matters into their own hands if they're not taking care of the way they are meant to be. But I can't figure out why. Like, I am very worried that this episode dealing with this major virus we're going to start the next one, and this is going to sort of be over and old news by the time we begin the next one, because what I had expected from the previous episode, I thought would span a few more, just didn't come up at all. That's not to say it won't. Next episode, it may surprise me and sort of double back and then talk about it. But what I'm getting concerned about is that this show is maybe jumping around a little bit much. And that's a real, tricky thing to balance, because I'm sure that a big part of what makes this show fun for a lot of people to watch, and maybe fun for the writers to write, is the heist aspect. They're always doing something that's sort of an organized, covert mission that is taking place in an area that's either you would never expect this to be an issue at all, or it's someplace that's really high security, and so they have to take all of these specialized measures to get in. And I could see that maybe continuing on with that same story in another episode and not having another heist to go with it might be less interesting for people. That said, I wish that I got more of a sense of what the world is thinking and how it is responding to what they're doing. We don't really hear anything about this senator that they kill, or congressman, because he was on his way to a heart attack anyway, so they decided to murder him. I really wanted to see the response from the media about that, if any. I'm sure that there's something, because he was a high-profile person. I really wanted to see the conspiracy theories that doubtless would have arisen with his death coinciding with the explosion of the place that the lab that makes the seeds that he was sort of railing against. I would love to hear what the ideas are out there. And if there was any evidence discovered, blah, 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 blah. What I feel ready for is to settle down into not necessarily just one main plot, but I would like to feel a little bit more connection to the missions after they're completed. Because I can't help but think, if I were one of these people, a traveler, and I were sent on these missions, and I completed them or didn't, and somebody else did, I would be obsessively checking out the news and trying to find out whatever I could about who stepped in, how did that get done, and the impression that I get really from this episode is that not a lot of time has passed and they didn't have a chance to really be obsessive before this whole new crisis swept in. But that's not actually provable. It's, like I said, the impression that I get, but I don't have any real sense of how much time has passed since the end of the last, all I know is that there was enough time that Grant was able to put the drug into his wife's, prenatal vitamins, folic acid, I think it was specifically. And for that to have an effect and for them to schedule a follow-up appointment with the doctor and everything has, sort of sorted itself out. I would think that would be about 4 or 5 days minimum. And I could be wrong about that. But that seems to me enough time that even if we don't see them being obsessive, maybe they have some answers already. Maybe they've figured out some of what happened or who did what. And they can just sort of tell us in passing about what the media response was with everything, or if there was a result from their attempt to create a movement. Did something work out with that? Or is there no discernible change? So anyway, all of that to say, I do really, really like this episode. But I was a little bit distracted initially because I went into it sort of with an idea of where we were going. I realized that we didn't go there. And then I started to get worried by the end of this episode that the next one wasn't going to continue on this story either, and that we were just going to move on to the next issue. And I wouldn't think that would be something they would do because it seems like there are so many lives on the line. But that doesn't seem to necessarily be a factor against just moving to the next plot. So, okay, let's begin. So we start off with Marcy and Carly. And Marcy is showing Carly what drugs to give her son because he is crying and sick and not doing too well. I love this because when we go back at the end of the episode to this little boy, it's really obvious what they're setting up once you see the pattern of the rest of the episode. But in the moment, it just feels like such a routine thing. Kids get sick. Kids get the sniffles, I was the kind of kid, I know a lot of people struggled with multiple ear infections when they were kids for whatever reason. I was the kind of kid that got bronchitis a ton. I have not got great lungs. And this doesn't really catch your attention in the moment because you're just like, okay, yeah, this is something that Carly inevitably has to deal with as a kid, or as a mom to a kid. I really am not sure whether this kid is suffering from the actual flu that winds up being an issue the rest of the episode in this scene, but it still sort of gets you into that headspace. So then we go to Philip and Trevor, and they're talking to one another about what happened. Oh, you know what? Here, Trevor says, I thought you might want to talk about it. It's been 2 weeks. I just clocked that. Now, I'm not totally sure, but I think he's talking about the death of that girl. But I might be wrong. So maybe we are given a definite amount of time. 2 weeks is even longer than I thought. I really would expect some updates then. But anyway, they're going to this RV that's parked in this like kind of weird, desolate spot by a lake. I say desolate because it's in the middle of like a parking lot area. It's not a beautiful little like, it feels like an abandoned area that had been for tourists, which makes it a little bit sadder. So this dude is giving them an antidote, an antiviral, to this virus that is going to be coming down the line. And when he gives it to them, he coughs. And this is our first hint that all is not well, but we don't quite know that yet. When they come back to these two, they have been killed later on. And it's a weird thing because this is how they are in an RV specifically because they're traveling up and down, giving this thing to all of these different teams. But I really would have thought they didn't have to kill him. It seems like he's ill and on his way out anyway. It's unclear to me why. I guess just as a guarantee, like they can't wait for him to die. They need to actually get him out of the way. So there's this scene, and I know that this is like not something that I should really particularly be focusing on, but bear with me, guys. So I don't know how many of you have noticed the Travelers like banner on Netflix, but it's one of those things where it's not. There are a few different versions of it. But when you look at the one that's on Netflix specifically, not the one that I use for the banner for the show, all of the men are wearing just like jeans and t-shirts, very boxy outfits. And then we have Marcy, and she's in this like really like deep cut lace up black mini dress. And that's what Marcy's in. And Carly is in a pair of like what look like probably Lycra pants or something, a regular t-shirt that's a little sheer so you can see her bra underneath, and a black corset, under-bust corset over that. And it's one of those things where this show, it's weird because I feel like maybe this is a result of needing to appeal to a demographic with their advertising, because within the show, I really felt like the two of them are not sexualized that much. Like, we definitely have Marcy being, I mean, she's obviously beautiful. We have a lot of men like flirting with her, but it never feels like they're doing anything gross. And seeing her in this dress, I was just kind of like, that is so not anything she'd wear on the show. I mean, unless her character undergoes some dramatic changes later on, but we're halfway through season 2. At this point, I feel like if she hasn't become someone already who wears that sort of outfit, then it doesn't represent her as a character the majority of the time. So what are you doing? And with Carly, that underbust corset, I just don't really know what to make of it. And I remember looking at it just a few days ago when it was like coming up on my feed on Netflix and being like, what is with this corset? What are they doing? And then I watched this episode, and we have this scene with this outfit that I cannot for the life of me figure out. So Marcy's just wearing her usual sort of like loose floral short sleeve dress. She wears clothes that are pretty similar, just a little bit more updated and a little bit less frumpy to the character that she became, or that she, to the person that she came into, for lack of a better word, when she first came over from the future. Her outfits have not changed that much. And with Carly, it's hard to know. I'm not feeling like I have a particularly good handle on how she dressed before this. But in this scene, she is wearing I think just a pair of jeans, a plain white t-shirt. And then over that, she's wearing this lace-up corset front style taupe bra over the t-shirt. Y'all, what is that? Between that and this underbust corset, they keep trying to do corsets for her. Like, this is something, apparently. I don't see it. I don't, like, is this supposed to be depicting that she's got, like, sort of a, like, straight-laced, quote-unquote, personality going on? Are they being that obvious with it? This is just one of those things where I really wish that I could talk to the costume designer, because or the director who ultimately does choose the costumes and what he is looking for. I find costuming, because this is what I went to school for initially, really, really fascinating. And a lot of times it tells you so much about a character. But with Carly, I mean, that banner to begin with, I'm just baffled by, not in terms of the overall sentiment, which is the women have to be sexy and the guys can just be whatever. That I'm deeply familiar with. So that isn't even it. But it just didn't feel like those outfits were the characters' outfits, regardless of any, sex appeal. And then this, and like, all of a sudden it felt like the first time I'd seen a corset on her. It may not be the first time. She may have worn them in other episodes, but this one was so badly done that it just really got my attention. I don't know what they were thinking with this. The bra looks like something that you would have found at, like, Wet Seal in the 90s. It's just, there's something very dated about it. And putting it over a t-shirt also makes it feel really 90s. I don't know if you guys remember that period where wearing a spaghetti strap tank top over a t-shirt or over a long sleeve. And she's also got a choker. And that, with it, this whole thing just looks so... It looks like Delia's almost. Those of you who know what Delia's is, I don't need to explain. And those who don't, just Google Delia's and you'll get exactly what I mean. So then we have this conversation that happens between the two of them. Carly is commenting that she knows she's probably being ridiculous about her son. And Marcy is like, no, you have a maternal instinct. And yeah, he's not technically your kid, like you inside the body, but in a very basic physical way, he is. You are inside the body that gave birth to him. That bond is still there. The physical response of your body to this child is still going to be what it is. You can't avoid that. And then she mentioned something about how Marcy hadn't used to think that way, or that she said something like this just before the day that they wiped her. And Marcy sees that she's uncomfortable about it and asks her why she's behaving so weirdly. And Carly realizes that nobody's really talked about this yet with Marcy, and she doesn't know that she wants to be the person to bring it up. But Carly sort of gives away via her body language the answer to Marcy's questions, because Marcy begins to question her about exactly what the circumstances were surrounding her being reset. And she begins to realize basically, Carly tells her, you asked for more time. You wanted to think it over. And of course, this Marcy is just looking at this in a purely logical sense and is like, why would I have had to think it over? I was going to die otherwise. And Carly says, I know, and that's what I said at the time. But now I'm beginning to think that maybe I understand. And she says something about how you got wiped before you were ready. You asked for time, and all of a sudden it happened. And we didn't realize it was already going to happen. Which, of course, leads Marcy to ask, was it against my will? And Carly admits she doesn't know, because they don't know what was going through Marcy's mind at the time. They don't know what direction she was leaning in. They do know that nobody waited for her okay. Nobody waited for her to choose. But there is a chance she had been going to make this choice anyway, and there's just no real way to know. But I wonder what this does, because the tech who did this, who reset her and who took over the guidance counselor's body, she is still around. She's still obnoxious. And I can't help but wonder if she's going to wind up in a position where Marcy finds out exactly what she did, and the fact that she didn't wait, she didn't care. And if that is going to come back and bite her, because I kind of want it to. She's out here like really frustrated with the fact that she's not included in the team's plans, but she's not part of the team. She apparently came into the 21st without permission even, which I didn't quite realize. And now she's all like, you know, bratty about the fact that she doesn't get given missions and stuff, but why would she? That's not her role. She doesn't have a role. She came back here to just do this one particular thing she wanted to do. And once it was finished, I don't know what she thought was going to happen, but she clearly did not think this shit through at all. So there's a scene where she's just like being very obvious, talking about everything with Trevor in front of all of the other people who are sitting at the table. And they all seem to be like sort of on their phones and not paying attention. But it's still really risky. It just feels like she doesn't have a lot of respect for what it is they were sent back to do. It doesn't feel like she has respect for anybody else on the team. I mean, she wouldn't have reset Marcy without Marcy's permission if she respected her at all. This was something that she clearly just felt like it's a given that I'm supposed to save her and keep her from dying. If she is going to die because she doesn't listen to me, then that just means I'm not listening to her. And I wonder what this is going to turn into, because she's just so not a team player. But she does have a lot of knowledge and ability, and those are not a good combination. So I wonder what she's going to wind up getting involved with a little bit later, because I feel like it's not going to be pretty, and I kind of hope that Marcy is able to get, I don't even want to say give her like comeuppance. I just mean I want Marcy to at least have somewhere to direct her anger, because she obviously has some real frustrations about the reset and what it feels like. And it's been sort of this nebulous, like, well, it's really unfortunate that this had to happen, with nobody to really look to blame. And sometimes somebody to blame can be very comforting, whether it's totally fair or not. And in this case, I think it is fair. And even if it weren't, I just dislike this text so much, whose name I forgot, BT Dubs. If anybody knows, you can feel free to tell me, that I wouldn't mind Marcy taking it out on them a little bit. So, okay, we have the scene where Grant and his wife are at the doctor's, and she finds out she's going to be okay. It's actually a really beautifully acted scene. I thought her sudden rush of emotion and coming to tears when she realized that she was going to be okay was just a really beautiful moment of, like, I don't know, it just felt to me how that sort of relief of, like, maybe you thought you lost something. This, and obviously that's very literally what it is for her, but I'm trying to put it in terms of something that I have had happen where, on a much more minor level, for example, there have been times where I thought that I lost recordings, and I found them again and burst into tears because I thought it was gone and that I was screwed and that a bunch of work I did had just completely vanished. And you just have this relief reaction. And I thought that she just really was excellent in that moment. I go back and forth so much on his wife a lot of the time, not on whether I like her or not, because honestly, for the most part, I do like her. And I think that she can be very fair and she's perceptive. But there are times where, with everything that's going on, a pregnancy storyline can really slow the plot down. I'm just not somebody who cares about that kind of story. So whenever it winds up being added to the mix, I tend to just brace myself for some boring shit coming up. And I appreciate any time an actor is able to make something that I anticipate not enjoying actually be interesting to me. So we go to the headquarters, and they're all talking about what's coming up. Grant says, our mission is to save 3 of the people who historically don't make it. And they are all injecting themselves with what they think is this antiviral, I guess. And they are looking at this personal trainer, flight attendant, and travel blogger that are prime hosts who probably spread the virus when they look back at the data of what happened. So they're taking these antivirals out into the city, and in one case, we see a guy in Shanghai, and he just winds up being accosted by a random dude on the street. It's not even like this is a friend or somebody who's like talked to him, or it's just a hit and run. Grant, he winds up hitting a woman who is in front of him during a yoga class, an outdoor yoga class. And I like that because if it hadn't been outdoor, there is absolutely no way this could have worked. You can't, there's no way to sting her with a bee in an indoor class. So I did kind of see this and was like, an outdoor yoga class? This is kind of a weird. And then when I realized what he was using as his cover story for what happened, I was like, oh, okay, I guess there are only so many ways to explain this away. The travel blogger is getting her vaccination, so it's much, much easier with her because that's just going to be part and parcel of the whole thing. And then there's a girl in Germany who is running with a trainer, and she has an asthma attack. Or no, she's not running with a trainer. I think she is a trainer, if I'm not mistaken. And she has to stop and use her inhaler, and it turns out that the drug is in her inhaler. We see Philip go in and drop an antiviral into an open container of water at a gym. And it was confusing to me because in some cases I thought, okay, maybe these are other teams that are trying to stop the spread of this virus also. And we are just seeing them intercut with our friends who are, doing a similar mission on their side of the planet. You come to find out that this is not what's happening. I don't think. What it is either it's other teams who think that they are doing the same thing as ours, and they think that they are preventing the spread of this virus, but they are also being tricked, or it's members of that faction who are flat out knowledgeably infecting people. Because, spoiler alert, this whole thing winds up being a big con. I felt so angry and so like, oh God. I really hated, guys, finding out that Philip got played like this because, like I said, I saw it coming. I think we all saw it coming. He is so vulnerable because of his addiction, because of his feeling like he doesn't really see eye to eye with the rest of his team regarding how they should be handling certain situations. He feels, I think, kind of isolated and alienated because of both. And that leads to one feeding into the other. That's a prime, like, a lot of people who fall victim to addiction do so because they feel really alone and like they don't have support, like nobody really understands what they're going through or cares or will be there for them. And so for Philip to have already been in the body of a victim when he like got dropped in here, and then to start questioning what's going on, and not only questioning, but then we find out in no uncertain terms that shit is fucked up more than they even guessed. It just all does combine into a perfect storm of continuing to abuse drugs and to need a crutch of some kind. So Grant gets in the car and we are listening to the news report about the flu that's spreading. And this newscaster is talking about how hand washing is the most effective way to prevent the spread of the disease. They all think that they really took care of this and that they did a good job. It all seems to have gone according to plan. And yet, it begins to spiral out of control really quickly. There's a brief scene between Carly and her baby daddy, and they are arguing. Not arguing isn't even really fair because he doesn't seem to really see her point, but he capitulates without much argument in a way that I actually was pleasantly surprised by. He comes in and is supposed to have taken their son for the day. And when she says, "What do you mean you're going to work?" He's like, "I can't help that. I don't know what to tell you." And she's like, "Yeah, the thing is, you also did not inform me that this was an issue you needed help with. You just came in and told me you were leaving when you are supposed to be here. So I'm going to need you to like step up your game in terms of overall communication." And I appreciated that he immediately is like, "All right, can you please help me with our son and take him to the babysitters?" And she gives him this long look and she says, "Fine, but you're doing pickups for the rest of the week." And he says, "Absolutely." And he leaves. And she also tells him his jacket's on the hook by the door. And it's this moment of like her smiling to herself, even though she's obviously a little bit irritated. There's like actual affection between the two of them for a second. And when she turns and talks to her son comes running over. I didn't know that he could walk, but this little baby boy is so adorable right now. Y'all, I don't like kids that much, but goddamn, when he comes running over and takes his little toy and then goes running back around the corner, I nearly died. So it's just an interesting scene because, you know, her partner is he is such a shitty dude in so many ways, but it feels like things are actually progressing between them in a surprising way. Like he is making more of an effort than I ever expected to see from him. I got so nervous last episode when it looked like he was going to be starting drinking again. There is no evidence of that this episode. Now, granted, that kind of thing can sort of sneak up on you, and that may be what happens. But as of right now, it just looks like they had a little bit of a moment where she had to be very firm with him about the way that he's handling stuff, but he heard her and actually like listened and seemed to respect the fact that she put her foot down and gave her boundaries to him very clearly. So we go to Philip, who is using these eye drops again. And I should mention that at the very start of the episode, we see him writing this huge formula down. And of course, it meant absolutely nothing to me. And we see these two people, one of them being Jenny, taking that information and running off with it. And Jenny breaks up with him, basically tells him, "I have a new mission. This thing between us is over." He says, "I thought we had a connection." And she rolls her eyes and says, yeah, I'm your connection. Obviously meaning to drugs, which is like so clearly not what he meant. She's gaslighting him here, making it seem as if she thinks he just wants to use her for the drugs, when she knows perfectly well what he meant, and she's the one who got him hooked on purpose. And it's really hard to watch, knowing that she is like playing him the way that she is. And again, knowing how vulnerable he is and how isolated he feels. And he kind of thought he had found a person that was going to be on his side a little bit. And then it turns out that she is just full of shit. I just really, it just hurts to watch. It really does. So he is checking out what's going on with this infection rate when all of a sudden these two travelers come in. One of them is the cop that we've gotten to know, and her partner, who I don't think I met before, but I could be wrong. And they are both infected with this virus, and he is in particularly bad shape. And we wind up getting news that everybody is potentially infected, that it looks like from once they start to like track where the disease is coming from, that it's centered in places where there were travelers, and that maybe they are the carriers. They inform everybody and get them brought into the headquarters away from people in an attempt to sort of quarantine. And Trevor gets pulled out of like the middle of a rehearsal for Romeo and Juliet, which he is so adorable. I love him so much. I was talking today to Owen about the trope of an old person in a young person's body. It's the sort of thing that you see all the time, especially in shows that have sort of, supernatural stuff. Like one could say that a vampire is often an old person in a young person's body, because their body doesn't age, but their mind continues to change and grow as they experience things and live. And it's something that I don't think I realized how infrequently it really works for me when I see it on screen. Somebody who is his age being apparently someone older. And I think the reason is so often just the simple fact that the person playing the old soul has too much inherent energy. That can be either the director's problem, that could be the actor, but they always seem a bit too bubbly. And that is, it can go either way, where the actor plays it that this person is, that their body language seems too energetic. Oftentimes they fall back on the shorthand of making the actual character's personality a little bit too jaded and cynical in order to counteract the physical. And I think what their mind is attempting when they are picturing how to behave as an old person in a young person's body, they want to portray world weariness versus a body that is young and springy and unused almost by that point, right? So I get the mentality behind playing these characters that way. But then there's Trevor. And what a great example of how to go against a lot of instincts and still have it be incredibly effective. Guys, he gets across this sort of gravity. He is thoughtful and considered in the way that he speaks and moves. He has an almost formality a lot of the time. And yet we do see him sprinting. We see him going flat out running in enjoyment of this younger body. It's not that there isn't energy to him. It's simply that he is so much more selective in where he uses it. And as an actor, when he is in a scene where he isn't running, where he isn't going to be doing something physical, you really feel like everything is happening inside his head. It's not, he just plays it so much more cerebral, which makes so much sense to me. If you are not only older, but you are as old as this person in his head, who we know is probably hundreds of years old. And I just think that he is one of the only actors who has played someone inhabited by an older soul whom I have believed it. I really believe it when I watch him in a way that I don't think even really registered for me until today when I sort of stopped and thought about it. There are just so, I mean, I hate to bring up Twilight at all, but Edward Cullen is supposed to be over 100 years old, and he is in the body of a teenager. But he feels like a teenager. He does not feel like somebody who has lived a long time and seen a lot. He feels like a dramatic tween boy. And I mean that in terms of how he's written and how he's acted by Robert Pattinson, all of it. And this performance for me is just, it's so understated that I think it just sort of snuck up on me. But man, I'm super invested in Trevor as a character. And if anything happens to him, I'm just going to be devastated. So we go to the lab where they are looking at the virus and trying to figure out exactly what it is. And they are all really surprised by the appearance of it. They don't think it even really looks like a virus. And it becomes clear, like, once they say this, that my immediate thought was, I bet that the information that Philip got was to create this fucking virus. This was when I started to, like, put it together what had likely happened, and it does turn out that's what it is. Meanwhile, the teammate that had come in on the back of the motorcycle starts going into seizures. He's bleeding out of his eyes. He's foaming at the mouth. And eventually he dies, despite everything that Marcy does. And she really fights hard to try and keep him alive. And she breaks down for them the infection rate and talks about how some of them are immune, and she doesn't really know why. They're thinking that maybe they can create some sort of serum to help people based on the fact that they are immune, but it's going to take time, and it may kind of be too late based on how quickly this thing spreads. And this is when Grant says, check for other teams that are exhibiting the same symptoms. And they say, she explains to them, you've probably infected everybody you've come in contact with today. It's a 40% rate. Carly tries to leave to go get her son, and they have to stop her and be like, girl, no, you are not going anywhere. And when we take a look at the map and the way that this thing is beginning to grow, it's like major cities, of course, you know. Guys, I'm really, really interested. I hope next episode they do continue with the storyline, because I am so curious what the show is going to think would happen with an infection like this. Because I don't think anybody could possibly have predicted what actually has happened here in the United States, especially regarding COVID. The fact that people don't believe that it's real and are flouting basic preventative measures in attempts to own the libs or God knows what is so incredibly backwards that I don't think I would have believed it if you'd told me. And I have a high capacity for belief in people's stupidity. Like, It's grown, if anything, over the past 5 years, at least. And yet, the reaction of so many Americans to this virus is so beyond belief to me. If I read this in a history book, I just don't think that I would really buy how widespread it is. And granted, I live in Texas, so I'm in a special spot where there are a lot of people who are willing to shoot themselves in the foot down here. They, like, the conservative conspiracy theory thing is just so prevalent down here. Nevertheless, the number of people I see who genuinely do not seem to believe it's that big a deal is startling. And Owen has had several deaths in the family over this past 3 months. His father died, his grandmother died, and his great-grandmother died, all within the past 3 months. So I've been to a few funerals. And there were a couple at which people just were not wearing masks, even though they were going to be in a crowd with people who they don't know and who have traveled from other places to be there. I always, of course, wore a mask, but it's when other people won't participate, it begins to severely reduce how effective it is in the first place. You know, we all are supposed to be in this together. And we see later this episode a lot of imagery that has grown very familiar to us since the COVID outbreak. We see the beginnings of people quarantining. We see hospitals overrun and people wearing masks everywhere they go. And it's really bizarre to watch this in a fictional setting being presented as something that is like a world danger event, and to know that we are living this right now, and it's worse right now than it's been since it began, at least here in Texas and in Florida and a lot of other states that did not take basic precautions. And yet, because the quarantine has been lifted in so many places and so many things are open, it gives this this mood that things aren't as bad as they were. So people keep making comments like, I hope it doesn't get as bad as it was in March. And it's worse now than it was in March. The only difference is businesses are open now. And people are taking that to be an indicator that things are okay. And it's really frustrating. And it's just watching this and seeing this, fictionalized but very familiar situation. It is really jarring, and it gives you one of those feelings of wanting so badly to believe that shit is the way that this show is portraying it. You want to believe that people would be as careful and take it as seriously as they do in this show, but that isn't going to be. That's not how it actually works here. In other countries, maybe. And I just, guys, it's so depressing. It really is so depressing. And I had to postpone my wedding, which was supposed to take place in November of this year. Began to just really realize things aren't improving. And I can't ask people to travel. I can't have this in Florida, of all places, one of the worst hotspots. And yet, I also don't really know that postponing it is going to be effective, because I don't have a lot of hope that we are going to see a decrease in cases by then either. We have buried our heads in the sand so completely that I just don't really, there just comes a point where apparently if we can't all get on board with this thing, I don't really know what the hell is supposed to happen to suddenly cause things to improve. It seems like people really have this idea that we are going to get to the other side of it naturally, and that there's going to simply be a decrease after folks, like, their immunities build up. But we've seen people be reinfected. It's not the kind of thing where if you catch it once, you simply can't catch it again. It's less likely, but it still happens. So there's just a lot of misinformation. And obviously there was no way to talk about this episode and not discuss current events a little bit, and just how frightening it is to watch this, and how the virus is the least fantastical part of the episode. The part that seems like fantasy is people actually reacting with concern and a willingness to cooperate with everyone else, you know? So yeah, then we see the team beginning to put out feelers and get in touch with the couple that was giving them the supply of the antiviral, and finding them dead, which is like, really, that scene was surprising, because I thought we were going to find them, you know, having died of the disease, because we saw the guy coughing. But when they get in there, they just find his body. Like, I think that he'd been shot in the chest, if I'm not mistaken. Carly's partner is coughing and sick, and he goes and picks up the baby. So something is going to happen there. And I'm like worried about it, because I know it will devastate her if something happens to the kid. Her partner, probably it will also devastate her. I will be less sad about it, because I just really don't. I want him gone. Let's be honest. I really don't have a lot of interest in this subplot to begin with. And the idea of redeeming a dude who almost beat his girlfriend to death doesn't really feel like something I just don't want to put any energy into that. So if he dies, I'm not going to be that upset about it. But, so we have McLaren, and he has to get this thing. It's like bromine or something that is like going to be used to make this serum that Marcy is attempting to make. And we're jumping around a lot here between her explaining to him what's going on, and we have the scenes with David at the hospital where he is checking on all of the people that he is like either responsible for or feels responsible for, which aren't necessarily the same thing, but he's in a hot spot checking on his people, and he is definitely going to be hugely at risk here. And I just really, you know, if we're talking about Carly losing her partner, that's one thing. But if something happens to David, I'm going to be real mad about it. And I don't think it will. I hope I'm wrong. I would like it if maybe that were the catalyst for her realizing that she does care about him, because it's obviously having a hard time connecting for her. But I'm worried about it. So she shows them, as he's in the hospital, how exponentially this thing spreads, which, yeah, again, very, very familiar. And then we cut to this dude who goes to find Jenny, because it's a weird scene where Philip has been told, you're the one who gave us the information on this. And Philip is like, I don't remember doing any of that. Like, I remember this info, but I don't remember giving it to you. And the guy says, or no, I think Marcy realizes, you not remembering something means that somebody very specifically gave you a memory inhibitor. Something happened. So they go to Jenny's house to basically be like, what the fuck? And they find her on the floor, and she has OD'd. And I am going to assume it's either out of guilt or because she knows that, like, the goal of this mission is to reduce the population. she doesn't really have another mission lined up after this and thinks that taking herself out of the equation is just the simplest way to deal with everything. I'm not totally sure. Maybe she just doesn't want to watch the fallout of what she was involved with here. But she gets shot up with adrenaline and wakes up. And Philip tells her the mission's in trouble. And she says, no, the mission went exactly as planned. And McLaren is like, what the fuck does that mean? And Philip rightfully says, what did you make me do? And I'm like, yeah, that's the real question here. She says, my team tries to record messengers. But the incoming signal caused static on our devices. So we needed a historian and someone to synthesize the catalyst. And she uses the word catalyst. And I was like, yep, there it is. And this dude says, I was directed to create an antiviral. And she says, actually, you were directed to expedite genetic recombination of the historical pathogen. They created this virus and purposefully infected everybody. And they say something about, I think that at this point it's the tech who says the mission, like the director would not have authorized this mission. And she says, who said the mission came from the director? The future I left is divided between those loyal to the director and the faction. Both sides fighting for control back and forth. And as she's saying this, we're seeing like a building, the FBI building, being taken over by what just looks like military. She says, when you reset the director, we lost the ability to access the 21st. If we lost the past, we lost everything. So we had no choice but to shut down the reactor. Carly says, but we've received messengers and gotten missions. And she says, and it's all only messengers. Without the director's processing power, consciousness transfer isn't possible. So, before power was cut to the director, in our last moment of control, we sent everyone we could to the 21st all at once. The frame is capable of receiving and storing thousands. So Forbes, all of those people with the FBI, all our faction. And every mission we've done since has been for them. And this is when Jenny explains overpopulation is the single greatest threat to the 21st century. The director wasn't capable of seeing the natural solution. And this is one of those moments where I get what the show is doing. However, when you really look at what's going on with our resources in the world, overpopulation is not the problem. That isn't actually what the issue is. And I have a bit of a problem with the framing of it, because ultimately claiming overpopulation is what's hurting the future of the human race often is laid at the feet of the poor and those who don't have a lot of control over birth rates because they don't have access to healthcare and they don't have access to contraception. And really the issue isn't that they're people eating up resources. It's that capitalism prevents resources being allocated according to need, and they are only allocated according to who can pay for them. So while I understand what this show is attempting to do here in terms of this idea, fundamentally, I don't believe this is real, that this problem is a genuine threat. And so the concept that killing off billions of people on the planet is going to help doesn't resonate with me, because I believe that if we ever do reach some kind of future, when we look back, that is not the conclusion we will draw. We won't be like, oh, there were too many people. We will realize profit over people was the problem. So, yeah. And she just basically unapologetically says the mission comes first. And we have the military breaking into this, like, this, what's the word I want? I thought it was the FBI building. I'm realizing now that this got set up somewhere else, ostensibly, so that these people could be taken, is what I am assuming. So I believe that the next episode we are going to start, and there is going to be a major influx of the faction in the world, potentially, maybe just in this area. But I'm very, very curious to see how this shakes out, because, like I said, I have had issues with the whole idea of the director to begin with, and I know that the faction seems shady, but all of it really does come down to human error. Whether or not there's an algorithm, there's still people built that shit, you know? So I don't know whose side I'm going to wind up being on, and I don't have a lot of confidence about predicting whose side the team is going to be on, because I think that's going to split them up ultimately. I'm over time, so I have to go. But again, thank you very much to Stacie for commissioning this episode. I hope that you guys enjoyed the coverage, and I'll be seeing you soon with a new episode. Until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.